Thanks, Crystal. Hello and welcome everyone at Block Play X. This is our panel on the topic of decentralization. Is it a fad or a fact in the blockchain gaming industry? So my name is Adam Kling. I'm the CEO and founder of FYX Gaming. We created the core technology for CryptoFights, which puts the gameplay actually on-chain, as well as the NFTs that unlocks the game ability to do really massive on-chain interactions to get us into the metaverse. Now, CryptoFights, our flagship game, is available now on Google Play with limited access. But I'd like to introduce you to our other two panelists, starting with Kenji. Kenji, can you please introduce yourself?
Hi, Adam. Hi, guys. Thank you for having me today together with you guys. I'm Kenji, CSO in Carro. We're a used car marketplace in Southeast Asia, headquartered in Singapore, Thailand, Malaysia, and Indonesia, in 4 countries right now. We are in the Web 2, but as a CSO, I've been studying the opportunities in how we can engage more with customers through Web3, not just like issuing simple NFTs, but more through games and such. Thanks for having me tonight.
Thanks, Kenji. And Vijay?
Hey guys, thanks for having me here. Good evening, good morning, wherever you're from. So my name is Vijay, VK in short. I work at a company called Consensys, probably a very popular company. The founder of the company is also the co-founder of Ethereum. So I have a very diverse background. I've been in the Wall Street for 20 years, building tech for banks and financial institutions. And one day I accidentally jumped into reading about Bitcoin and Ethereum. The next week I was mining, and never looking back after that, going back into the banking and financial industry. Made a career out of it into the Web3 and DeFi and blockchain from 2016. My role at Consensys, I'm a director of tech. I also lead the global tech pre-sales. We have like many products. If you're familiar with MetaMask, yeah, we own MetaMask, and also work through another exciting product called Infura, which does pretty much a good volume of Ethereum traffic in this world right now. Happy to be here.
Thank you, Vijay. All right, so I want to open the topic up on basically defining what is decentralization and what does it mean for a game. I'll start and say I think it's interesting because I got into the industry, in the blockchain gaming industry specifically in 2018. And back then I remember the kind of the allure of it was that it felt more like this global computer that you could interact with, and it would kind of persist, almost like an organism that kind of sat out there. It was like its own life. And if, for example, the developer servers went down, it didn't matter because all of the game logic and all the game, for example, was out in kind of this blockchain cloud. And I think that's changed kind of over time because of the maybe the pros and cons of each different blockchain. But I think that's kind of, again, where I started from. And then as we kind of, I think, had to make some trade-offs and maybe the definition of that for the blockchain game industry, I think that really opens up the discussion about maybe how do we each define that. So Kenji, would you like to start?
Yeah. So in our case, I think it's more from a business angle of when you ask about the definition of decentralization. It's as long as we're looking into a racing game to engage more with customers, and as you mentioned, if it's not centralized in one PC or centralized all the data or the control in one side, because we want to have more like auto marketplaces, not just us, but because there are a lot of used car marketplaces around the world, including like Carvana Boom in US. I think also the auto OEMs like Porsche or other like Mitsubishi, Toyota, whoever, they also want to get engaged more with the customers after selling their cars. Therefore, instead of having just one brand or one controlled gaming process, we're trying to collaborate with more people to try to see how we can have a decentralized way of having a racing game, or how to interact more with the customers. So I don't know if this is the answer to what you mentioned, but I'm just trying to put in here that the angle that we are looking at right now is to have something that nobody can control, and everybody can have access to the data with more transparency. And we believe that is more in the fact, and it will be coming because the necessity and the demand is more in there.
Great, interesting. And one of the, I think the key takeaways from what you said is kind of like no central entity, right? It's not run
Yeah.
by, one company, one entity that kind of has the control or the red button that can kind of affect the entire thing. So Vijay, what would you say to that?
I think that's an excellent point to start with. I'm going to touch upon a similar category of things that decentralization. So it's a lot in the industry that's going on with respect to decentralization. But if you have to start with centralization, you have to look at what are the pain points. So with the centralization network, you need to enter and leave the central hub. That kind of is what Kenji is talking about, right? So it's a private entity or a public entity that is controlling what's happening in the central network or a central hub. So the data that you expose in the central hub, could be misused or could be used for something else which is not meant to. That's again a privacy issue that data can be seen by the central entity. No matter how we put controls over, still the central entity owns the data because you are using their servers. So when you talk about decentralization, we're really talking about more of a peer-to-peer technology, and the transfer and the control of decision making is purely up to you on how you participate in the ecosystem. Right. When I say you, it could be a gamer, it could be a gaming company, it could be a general party outside, or it could be a third party providing some services in the gaming industry. The privacy aspect, we can talk about that probably for days. And when it comes into decentralization, so you can choose to remain anonymous because you have an identity which is more like an hashed identity through which nobody can really know who you are unless you're willing to reveal it. So which is a great deal of a feature when it comes into revealing your identity. At the same time, you can choose to reveal your identity as well. Scalability. We all talk about scalability with centralized systems and centralized servers. So with the zero infrastructure in place, that means you don't have to invest money on building an infrastructure for running your DApp or your gaming, right? There are certain aspects that you need to invest, but still there is a public infrastructure that you can make use of for user verification, any kind of authentication, authorization, and identity that provides a gamer with a unique proposition in this gaming industry. These are some of the advantages I see. What it means to decentralization, and don't forget, the monetization ideas that comes up with decentralization is like phenomenal, right? The way that we used to transact 10 years back is no more the way we do it now. And imagine what is going to happen in like 10 years after now.
Yeah, that's actually an interesting point because I was thinking kind of, so I've been video gaming ever since I could remember. I think ever since the Nintendo and kind of the evolution of going through kind of the pay to play to free to play, multiplayer even, and now to where we're kind of talking about Web3 and play and earn, and it's honestly it's changing every 6 months, what we call it. But and so I think the key takeaways that I kind of heard you say was a lot of maybe some of the advantages of decentralization or using blockchain technology is that we can essentially own our identity now. Where, for example, in CryptoFights, like we do have a login and password, but it essentially is a Bitcoin wallet. And then you actually make your moves through that, but it's actually you signing those transactions. It's kind of it's your wallet that you get to choose, and then you get to potentially use that in other games, and we'll see what the future brings. But then also I think the transparency that it brings as well. So one of the things that FYX Gaming was kind of thinking a lot about several years ago was about esports. And in esports, you have competitive gaming. And in competitive gaming right now, especially looking at some of these online tournaments, is that there'd be a lot of cheaters, right? So client-side hacks, aimbots, they can increase accuracy or just kind of do something just enough to be a little bit maybe under the radar, but more above their skill level. And how do they detect that? And so with a centralized system, you're essentially trusting, some of these AAA game studios that essentially they're taking the input from the player. Maybe the headshot accuracy is super, super high, but only they are responsible for detecting it because they own the data. There's no transparency other than the fact that they give you permission to look at their data through an API, right? So I started kind of imagining, okay, well, what does the world look like when esports is this super, super large industry, hundreds of billions of dollars, and there's all of these competitive tournaments. Now, even today, there is essentially, like with ESIC, which is the Esports Integrity Coalition, that actually has people that collude. So you have esports teams that can go and actually throw a match while maybe themselves or their friends would bet in the esports betting markets on their loss so they can profit from that. And so that transparency of kind of what people are doing through their digital identity, right, is kind of delinked from a lot of this cheating and all that. And so the transparency with the game, I think, is a really big plus with decentralization, is also with just using blockchain technology. So if you imagine a world that has, for example, in esports, you actually maybe go through KYC, says you're a real person, not an email address. And then when you start to play these games, you're using your wallet. And in that wallet, you have your data, so like your moves that you do. And so if you start to cheat or have anomalies and all that, then actually the community can actually look into that data and say, hey, what's going on? So if you think of the Olympics, everyone can see what's going on. And then, obviously there's doping, that's a whole other thing. But and so I think that's one of the big things with, I think, decentralized, is that it's not a central entity controlling the data. It's kind of the player controlling the data, but we have the window into that as well. So any comments on that?
No, I think that's like perfect summary of what we discussed in the last 5 minutes. So thanks for summarizing that very well.
So so then, for example, when we have all of these different blockchain technologies, right, and we're going to try to keep it high level and not get too technical or nerdy here, but we have all of these different kind of proof of work, proof of stake, and we have all these probably in between. And all of these, I think, blockchains offer different pros and cons to accomplishing, I think, what blockchain gaming is trying to do. And so this kind of brings up where I think talking to various people that we have, people that believe that there's going to be a multi-chain future. And so when I kind of imagine that world is where I say, okay, I have maybe many different tokens or coins from different blockchains, and I'm playing, different games and different dApps on these different chains. But when I want to go from one chain or one token over to another one, so let's say it's a game item, right? How do I get my game item from a project on Ethereum over to a project on Solana? And so we have kind of these bridges, right? And so I'd like you two to actually walk me through how you see that world kind of developing. I know we're kind of speculating and imagining here, but maybe you have your own idea of how that's going to look like. Kenji, would you like to start?
Yeah, actually, because I'm not from a technical background, but what I would see or what I would expect in our future is, as you mentioned, the transparency of each player's ownership, and also having this cross collaboration within the blockchains, also within the games. Like, for example, I have a skin in a Fortnite that I can just bring it into a different game and wear it again, bring my NFT and use it as a player into a certain type of game that exists right now. It's limited into a certain blockchain, but I believe that what the people or what the demand is there is to have all this to be able to cross play as well. But yeah, I don't have any comments from a technical aspect if that is possible or not. But from a user perspective or from a business perspective, I hope that we have.
And Vijay?
Sure. I think let's talk about a quick example to understand, the scenario a little better, right? So let's say two games, game A, game B. A particular gamer is using both the games or playing both the games. Whatever, say, cards that he's earning in game A, gives him a better position in game B. Let's talk about that scenario. So how do we do it? There are two different games, two different monetization techniques, two different entities altogether. And, there needs to be some kind of communication or transaction mechanism that enables, okay, whatever the cards that is in game A can be used for a better position in game B, right? So there could be like various ways to do it. The wallet can do multi-chain transaction, if wallet is not an option. So then, that can be an API layer, which can do it. But these are like, again, going back into the Web2 kind of integrations. So the newest way, at least from what I see in the industry that's currently happening, is using cross-chain protocols. The cross-chain protocols, when we talk about cross-chain or bridges, immediately the one thing that comes into mind is, how stable or how secure they are, because we keep hearing about cross-chain bridges or protocols, being hacked every day. It's just only the beginning. It's going to get matured as we go in. One of the common pattern that I see in the industry from an implementation perspective is using a cross-chain protocol or a bridge right? This is possible in terms of moving that card that the player earns in game A, moving that into a different game which is running in a different blockchain. This is happening right now as we speak in form of NFTs, right? So this is also not just for moving cards. For example, monetization, right? The gaming companies want to keep the monetization and the gaming experience completely different. They can actually enable the players to use a different chain to play the game, and whatever they're getting compensated or monetized in some way, whether it's like earning cards or positions, completely different chain. So how they are doing it right now is purely using bridges. There are like various type of bridges. We'll not go into depth in the bridges, but still, this is an area I think that's going to change the gaming world phenomenally when it comes into user experience. Because you don't have to keep switching your identity, you don't have to keep switching your screens or whatever it is. It just is going to get it so spontaneous in the area that you specialize in, and it's just going to give a better experience for both the gamers as well as the gaming companies.
I personally have a little bit of a skepticism towards a multi-chain future, because it seems like we're kind of going back to where we started with Web 2, with kind of different silos and bridges where you have one group of assets that exists in one chain that you have to kind of lock and then kind of duplicate over to another chain, and then we're going to have maybe middlemen. Probably transaction costs, because there's going to be fees to facilitate all this stuff, and maybe you have to buy tokens to do that. And I think it just seems like it's not really the future that I think I originally signed on to when I got into this industry, where it was really like, if you think of the metaverse, right? We have this kind of big universe, that we can play in. And then we have kind of all these different planets, but to go to another planet, you're really kind of leaving everything back. And I just don't know if I fully agree with it yet. It's definitely probably more controversial. I think we've kind of landed into this, where we're like the current environment where we have all these different chains, because I think they're all trying to solve the scalability challenge, right? Is that if for example, Bitcoin, when it first got started and it didn't change the narrative and it did scale and the fees were low, what would the world look like today? Would there be all these other chains trying to compete and gain market share with that? And I don't mean just in market cap, but actually utility, where you can actually do things and buy the cup of coffee or operate your dApp. And so I think we've kind of ended up here just kind of because of that. And because of that, now we're thinking, oh, there's going to be 1,000 different chains or maybe 100 different chains. And we're all going to kind of, maybe one's better for this kind of app and another is better for that app. And it just seems like it doesn't fit maybe it's ideology, but it doesn't seem to be where, that's was so exciting, at least originally for me. I think having at least a majority, maybe not 100%, but a majority with a blockchain that can scale and can do smart contracts and basically do everything that we see today and, operate, whether it's an application like a straight up application or a game or whatever it is that actually creates a network effect, where I think a multi-chain future actually is kind of the opposite to me, is that you have all of these different sub networks that have to have, enough propulsion or enough momentum to kind of stay alive, for example. And, so I think any project that starts to create now, and this is something that we've encountered, is, we actually started on Ethereum and then we ended up moving to another chain because, how do you know what's going to, obviously this is the Wild West, it's the early adopter phase, but when you build something, how do you know what it's going to look like in 5 or 10 years, and do they need to, like, for example, Axie Infinity was a really good example of seeing how they kind of migrated because they had to scale. And I don't know. So that's kind of my personal 2 cents on that. But I think if we go into some of the other things that we saw, like layer 2 solutions, for example, do you have any comments on that? Do you think they're good or bad, necessary? Kenji, do you want to start?
I think personally, just going back to what you mentioned about the hard side of like cost, security, also like status, as Vijay also mentioned, and also personally as a user, I thought about also the graphics, like the hardship and all this hurdles to have a cross-chain multi effect. But when you mentioned about the multiverse, I was just going back when I was small and the first time that I played Capcom versus Street Fighter, it was like so exciting as a user because it was two different type of games, which is completely different from the world that we are now. But to have different type of graphics come together, be able to do something at the same platform was really exciting for me. And I think when we talk about like metaverse as well, right now everything is so much in silos, as you mentioned. But if it keeps on going as it is, I think the excitement won't grow, and also the adaptability for everyone to come in. There's still a hardship because people will still keep on. My grandpa or my dad won't be able to have a MetaMask and have his own wallet. He has to come over with all this strange wallet address internally also for public. But I think a lot of people are trying to overcome such kind of hurdles. Also the wallets are becoming more simple. I think it would be entangled to the phone number or like Gmail or whatever to an email address. There's many ways to identify yourself or your wallet as well. So I think going back to what we mentioned, I think it's good to have more cross-chain. I'm not sure, I couldn't hear your last question, but personally, I still hope it would happen.
Vijay?
Yeah, sure. See, I think L2 right now solves specific pain points, right? So one is scalability, definitely. The other one is the gas cost, if you talk about Ethereum. And they'll continue to live because if you look at Polygon, they are just going and innovating a lot of things over the L2 networks, right? And it'll continue to grow, is my opinion. It's just like a highway and a service road. They'll just meet when they need to meet, and then they'll just like divert when they need to do. I think this has given a lot of flexibility in the industry on some of the use cases that we've been thinking about, may not be possible in the blockchain world. And this has just really opened up a lot of other choices as well. There could be, more side chains and L2 solutions, but, they need to, at some point of time, converge into an L1 at some, that's a model that I'm seeing, which will really open up the possibility of creating so many diverse use cases in this industry. With gaming, it's no exception because gaming is so different from one game to another game to another game. It's just like completely, doesn't follow a pattern. So we're just going to have specific requirements for scaling, keeping the gas costs low and blah, 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 and all that. At the same time, we also have to see how the L1 networks, turn with respect to the L2 networks, right? So I'm closely watching the Ethereum merge as we speak. That's going to bring down a lot of noise from certain aspects, definitely not from a scaling perspective. We are just expecting only like 8% improvement in the scaling and probably 0% reduction in the gas cost, because that's not what they aim for the merges. So like this, as we go into more and more, evolution and innovation and more mergers and more upgrades into the L2, L1 networks, the L2 networks will probably, have to find out a different way of coping up and a different way of finding things, where they can keep their players and the users busy, from a usability perspective, because otherwise if L1 is going to solve all the problems, there won't be a way for L2 to survive. So, but I don't think that's going to happen. L2 will still be there because it does solve like specific pain points, which L1 doesn't solve right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember, I think it was back in 2018, we were messing around with some L2 solutions, and again, it's a lot has changed over the years, but we really, I guess we really believe that simplicity is going to win in the end. And I think to Kenji's point, with like the wallets and having different wallets and just kind of how that's going to work, because I don't really think we've even broached mainstream adoption yet in terms of gaming. That it needs to be very easy, and almost like blockchain needs to be essentially the database that's it's running on. Like, you don't say I'm going to go play Fortnite only because of it's on a certain database. You play because it's fun, and it offers kind of all of these things. And one of the things that I worry about with some of these LT solutions is that they're kind of there to help scale, like you said, as well as the gas costs, but is what happens when the L2 solutions don't scale, right? Like when we really start hitting massive adoption, the kind of the good world that we hope happens, can the L2 solutions even keep up? Same thing with even the L1 blockchains. So if we had a Fortnite, 100 million daily active users or something like that, and they're generating just like billions and trillions of transactions, will the economics, will the blockchain actually support and facilitate that growth to happen? So that's kind of a big question mark, I think. And so I'd like to move with a little bit of time left to kind of Q&A. So if anyone is in the audience watching, please ask your questions in the Q&A box. And so we just got one here. Let me just read this. Anonymous says, on a separate note, aside from what has already been discussed, how would you rate our progress to being decentralized? And if there is one action we could take to move towards this, what would it be? Does anyone want to take that?
Yeah, I can just give a shot at it.
Sure.
So, we cannot measure decentralization as my, fair thought here, right? If there is a tool or mechanism that we can measure it by this time, we'll be saying, hey, we are only like, 4%, we still need to go 96%. This will be like all over the place. But, from an adoption perspective, I think we need to do a lot of experimentation. We need to do a lot of innovation and start trusting the technology. I think the technology that's out there, the blockchain technology, it's created for solving trust issues. And I think that's why I think, we all have to leave our fear behind and then get into the decentralization with some capacity and then start trying out. Once you figure out the benefits and the other advantages that you have over the other technologies, and I think you'll feel comfortable going in mainstream.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I personally think, I personally think there's a lot of regulatory issues also behind that for decentralization to move more forward, not just within like coins or currencies or games. I think there's a lot that people, because we're still in capitalism where countries have a lot of power and they have different ways of perspectives and thinkings and their own they need to protect their own things. I think we're quite far still from the adaptability from a regulatory point of view from that perspective as well.
Yeah, that's actually a very, very interesting point, Kenji, because if we think about what happened with Axie, right? When we have over $500 million that gets stolen, and then you start to see, they're working with authorities and all that. And so when I started kind of hearing this news, I was like, okay, we have tons and tons of money or capital that's kind of tied up in this system, right? And is it like, the jurisdiction of this particular country or another? And so when it comes to decentralization, which, the point is to not have it be within a central entity. So let's say it was, I don't know, maybe it was more like Bitcoin, for example, locked up in a smart contract. What is going to happen with that? And I thought that was like a really good thought exercise, is that if it really is decentralized and it really, maybe the game developer would facilitate and start the smart contract, but had no control over where the funds go or where they're held. And it's kind of like the DAO concepts, right? And we have this kind of operating, and a government wants to come in and start to regulate that. All of those existing projects, at least, probably couldn't do that. And so I think that's going to be really tough for the governments to kind of figure out and wrap their head around. Hopefully we have enough, plenty of time before that happens. But I think that's a very interesting point, because we're not even, I don't think, close to it yet, to where it's really a major concern. But I think it could be because of the amount of kind of capital that could start to circulate through these networks, if you kind of imagine to the future. So couple minutes left. I want to ask the question is, like, when do you think like AAA studios will embrace blockchain? I know we're seeing some hints of that now, especially with related to NFTs and all that. But what do you think in the next like 5 years is going to happen? Vijay, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I think it's 50-50. I think the way gaming industry is going towards is like not one company can define what's going to happen in the future, right? It's more about how you engage gamers and then make it very interesting for them to be part of the game and live the game, right, rather than play the game. I think that's going to define everything. And if the AAA companies can figure that out and come up with a solution for that, that'll be great. But I think the small players are really doing that very well at this time.
And Kenji?
Yeah, well, I think it's the definition of AAA, but because I have a lot of opportunities to talk with like old, like Japanese traditional gaming companies. Like for example, I think it's a different approach. Of course, they do have their concern of how they need to evolve, but on the other hand, the people who make the games are really still not marketing, but more product out, which they focus on how to make the graphics, each character, the storyline, and it's not about because I think the demand and the crowd is different. Where some people want to play quickly, earn quickly money, or other people, I think it's still quite different, the crowd. I'm not sure. As Vijay say, maybe it's 50-50. I think there would be people who would choose that path and people who won't do as well. But yeah, in case of Japan, I think a lot of gaming companies are still struggling around there.
Yeah, I think personally, I'm kind of waiting for, Axie Infinity, I think, did a lot for the ecosystem as we got big VCs coming in, we got kind of this major inflection point that there really is huge opportunity. It was in an environment that's very different than today, right? It was in kind of an upward growth environment in terms of the price of coins and market cap and all that. So everything was kind of easier back then. And now we're kind of, I would say, more in a crypto winter where now it needs to be like extremely profitable just on utility rather than the prices going up. However, I've seen a lot of studios that are looking into how to do this, kind of on the technology of it, and also probably from the case studies of, like, I think it was Ubisoft with Ghost Recon did that, and it was kind of a failure. It didn't really do much. And I think there's a couple others, but is kind of the how, right? Because mainstream gamers, from what I've seen, really kind of don't care and don't like it. They think it's kind of more of a cash grab currently. Hey, it's blockchain, it's NFTs, and they kind of look at that as some other thing that they're not really involved in. Where when I go and play just a regular AAA game, I'm wanting to have fun, but then when you start to these NFT assets can maybe be valuable sometime, like a trading card collectible game, right? Magic the Gathering, like actual physical cards or baseball cards and all that. And I think there's definitely paths to do that. It's just we haven't seen it yet. And so I think in the next 5 years, I hope to see that we are transitioning more into finding that like real good business case for blockchain technology and kind of the mainstream market. At least that's what I want to figure out. I want to crack the code on that. I think everyone else is too. So let's end it there. We're out of time. Thank you everyone on our panel for joining on the topic of decentralization. And I will turn it back over to, I believe, Crystal to take us away. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adam. Hey, everybody.